Welcome back to the Dyslexic Maverick podcast. Okay, friends, your mind is literally going to be blown today after this discussion with Piper Hutson. When I started diving into her research, I can't describe it any other way than my mind exploded. So she does all this amazing research and talks about neurodivergent work conditions and how the arts play into it and all these different aspects, which is just absolutely amazing. So let me give you a little bit more formal introduction of Piper. So Piper has a doctorate in education and really studies in the intersectionality of neurodiversity, art, and health, focusing on cultural spaces that promote well-being and accessibility. Her contributions go so far and wide, but she's curated over 30 art exhibits across the country. She's co-authored 2 books and has several publications in peer-reviewed journals on topics like neurohealth, digital inclusivity, and learning styles. Piper, I could not think of a better person to have on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful that among the neurodivergent community, when we meet someone who reminds us of a passion point of another, we're just like, oh, just set up a meeting and talk. And those are the meetings that really get us into questioning how our brains work and how we thought that our brains worked under the terminologies given to us. So it's great to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure. So the first question I always ask my guests, do you have any drinks around you? Because I feel like all of our brains have like multiple drinks usually.
Yes, and actually, that's one of the things I always prep for, and I try and get off screen because I will have the drink that has the energy in it. Again, we could go to the very nature of needing certain different types of energy and how our brain processes it. I know some people who specifically do energy drinks with B vitamins because that has a better blood flow reimbursement. I do cold brew in a smoothie with spinach because I know I have an iron deficiency. So if we're talking hydration, we're already getting into the multiple layers. So I've got my smoothie that I made for breakfast with the caffeine. And then usually I have an alternative liquid of choice. That is my hydration liquid, which I forgot today and I noticed. And then the third is usually the enjoyment bubbly drink. So each one has a different sensory profile and each one does a different things. Most of the people I meet usually have at least 3 drinks.
Yes. Yes.
So I hid them because I guess I was ashamed. So thank you for pointing out the expectation of having a desktop that is clean without our needs available was something I preemptively did.
I love it. I love it. I just think that that's the best way for us to start off podcasts because we always do. And even myself, I have mine hidden too, right? Like I'm like, people don't need to see all my drinks, but really that is the world that we live in. I don't walk out of the house without like just arms full of different drinks.
And we could even go into the societal shame of I was gifted what I did not know was a Stanley Cup. And for someone who goes through 4 of those a day, I was grateful to have something that didn't spill and fit. And then when the SNL came out with it, I was like, oh no. Is this basic white bee situation? Like how do I hydrate myself and not be a meme at the same time, which shouldn't even be a concern that I'm having. But that's where my brain goes, being scared to share my hydration.
Oh, there's a lot of shame and like in judgment, I think, when I'm coming into an office and I have multiple drinks, and sometimes I even hide them in bags. Like, I'll have, like, cans of things so that it doesn't look like I have 3.
You can't see me, but my hands are covering my face because every day I have a towel that I put so that one drink doesn't spill in the bag that's not supposed to have a drink in it, so that the drink that I'm carrying can be supported by the drink in the other bag. Yes, that is way too familiar a hydration issue. That's one of the things I'm always grateful when speakers are asked to go somewhere. Having a drink on hand acknowledges that uncomfortability of asking for liquid, the dry mouth that usually comes from being excited or nervous or having just hydration issues. And it gives a fidget object. So one way is as a host, anyone who is inviting into your space, a bottle of water, we could then go into questioning sustainability, but a hydration is a wonderful tool of access that people don't recognize. Just having a clean beverage near you is supportive.
I absolutely agree. I think that my brain could go so many different ways with this, but that is so important when we're setting up meeting rooms too, that each place setting, and I agree, like plastic bottles aren't great for everyday use, but in some situations, that's just the best we have, right? So having people have accessibility to water, it literally fuels our brain too. We need to be hydrated so that our brains work, right?
We need to be hydrated. We need to continue that plasticity with our brain that we know hydration helps with. Yet we sit in a meeting room or a conference room for an hour with nothing to drink, or shame bringing in our 3 drinks and then wondering why we feel fatigued at the end. So, hydration, that is definitely a takeaway from this. If you're not already drinking, don't be ashamed if you're drinking 3 things in a minute.
Absolutely. And I love how literally with just my first question, which is just such a typical question for me, we literally just start diving into the science of why we need water. So this is just like a little tap into this conversation and how amazing I think it's going to be. The other thing, right before we hit record on this, I was commenting on your amazingly beautiful office space. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, we do have we'll have every podcast recording on YouTube as well, because I think a lot of people are just visual listeners too. So I like to see where people are and how they're talking in podcasts. But so it'll be on YouTube if you want to see. Piper's office is just absolutely amazing. And I think again, we were kind of talking, we need these visually pleasing backgrounds just to help our brains kind of focus. At least I didn't really think that it was a neurodivergent quality, but it's very important to my brain. So, and to yours too?
Absolutely. And first thing, thank you, because I didn't do a visual description, which is usually one of my go-tos because I was so excited to talk with you. So for the audio visual, I am a late 30s Caucasian individual who has a preference for 1940s pinup style. So my hair is done in a good old-fashioned 1940s wet set, pin curls. They are red. I have a background of what I call Victorian maximalist, being a 19th century British specialist by heart. And this is actually my partner and husband's office. He is a Baroque Italian specialist. So the irony of us maybe not appreciating the same aesthetics, we both need to be continually stimulated visually. And I noticed that for my brain, I kept seeing best practices of the blurred background for not distraction, but I prefer having more to look at and not having the requirement of the forced eye contact. So giving opportunities of visual relief in the background is something I've noticed that helps my brain.
I love that. And just for a little bit of context, I am a early 40s white Caucasian woman. I'm actually wearing just a black t-shirt, which I wear on every single podcast. So that one is consistent. And I've got a dark green background with a picture of one of our favorite beaches in the
But
background
it's
as well.
blurred, so I
But it
wouldn't
is
know it was
blurred.
a beach.
Yeah. And it's usually not blurred. Somehow my settings got to the blurred. I don't
Well,
know. That wasn't
according
intentional.
to best practice for ADHDers to keep them in attention is to have a blurred background, and I disagree with that.
I do
I
too.
think authenticity of the background is something my brain needs, and visual details. So that's something I'd love to know from others who find the Zoom background preference. Is it true? Is it not? How does your brain stay stimulated in a Zoom meeting?
It's so interesting, and I usually see people's eyes going around the room, even, like, when I'm talking or thinking, usually I'm kind of scanning and looking at different things too, so I bet that could be, like, your next research.
We did just the second book was trying to understand people's understanding of optics and perception to figure out why they like certain things, what aesthetics are expected for certain neurotypes, and how do we find out what truly we enjoy looking at in order to make it a tool of self-regulation by discovering our visual sensory perception. So that was the Neuro Arts and Sense Making book. That just came from wanting to know why people have art and why some who are along these particular neurotypes divert to styles that are different.
Interesting. So, from that book, what was the one thing or something that really surprised you through all of your research of writing that book?
Oh, I couldn't have a better segue because when you contacted me and you said specifically dyslexia, I and my brain is already scanning from all the research we've done. We started really looking at the neurodiversity in tech corporations and the kind of funneling into the workplace, the expected advocacy and inclusion that you would assume comes with that, and the kind of fallout for those that don't have those understandings of adjustments. And so when we went so far down the research track with these neurodivergents willing to share their reactions to environments, it became immediately noticeable to me that we don't take enough consideration into optics. For me, most everything of how I react or expect to react is due to visual stimuli. That goes first. And everything is secondary to my brain for that. So much so that auditory processing delays are very common for individuals who are overloaded by visuals. And I had no idea that my brain didn't easily store information given to me auditorily. Knowing that changed quite a bit of how I thought of myself in the corporate space. So when dyslexia came to the conversation, I recognized, well, I talk about it in regards to the co-occurring. That is very common in neurotypes. So much so, I believe it was 50% with autism and something like 25 with ADHD. And I kept wondering, as a mom who talks to other moms, wondering how to support their neurodivergent kids, the descriptions of difficulty reading were very different. And with my son, who refused to read, entering into school into such a violent, angry, internalized self hatred of the task of reading, we knew it had to be more than just not quite seeing it. And that forced me to remember that I was a late learner with reading. And the more I really thought about it, the aha moment was the Percy Jackson movie that came out. And after he gets his powers, he sees Greek shift and become English because it translates. And my brain went, yeah, like that. And I went, well, if my brain is continuously altering the optic sensory information I'm getting, perhaps the singularly black and white lines aren't forming properly. And it's actually the visual processing frustrations that I have that were leading to my difficulty reading text. When I thought that would be something similar in my child, he immediately was like, no, that's not it at all. He says he doesn't realize what he is writing is not standard because everything he writes is mirrored. And the mirroring is perhaps because when the light sensory information is going into his head flipped, there's not the orientation to reflip it. And it's a spatial visual processing of the visual information that's causing his mirroring. So when you said, do you want to talk about dyslexia? I'm like, maybe I don't know what dyslexia is at all anymore.
I mean, this is kind of blowing my mind because what I think of as dyslexia, there's so many commonalities of what you just described, and yet it challenges my perspective of it too, which I love. Like I'm like, "Oh yeah, challenge what I've always believed," right? Like give me some information to like really kind of play around with and break whatever I thought was to be true. And because I think so many times we just in so many things, right? Not just in this, but we think of, well, this is what I know to be true, so this is what I'm going to prove. And you already that's just such a narrow-minded way of thinking of anything, I think. Um, and I see that a lot just in daily life. And so I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is kind of breaking the mold," but yet it makes so much sense because, my dyslexic son can a significant trouble flipping P's and D's and Q's, all of those around, but also highly mechanical and can understand how engines work and gears change. And I explain when I'm talking to companies, this is the same brain, right? Like the visual challenges, quote unquote, with flipping a P and a D or a B is and a Q are the same brain that give you this amazing way of looking at something in this visually, spatially different way, right? You can see how gears work and belts turn and all of these different things come together in a different way for his brain, and you can kind of see it click. So it's fascinating to me to see that our eyes are actually part of the dyslexic makeup, right? Is that kind of, am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. And the moment you said it, that it changes the way you think. So for me, I have a 9-year-old son, and I was early integrated into the American idea of you get an IEP, you are now a parent that has a kid with a disability. And that's not what we needed at the time. And that's what I think a lot of American parents get stuck, kind of thrown into an expectation, a framework that they don't even fully understand and are given the opportunity to question. The original research that we did understanding our son was in the medical framework. We were told that this was what was happening. He needed special treatments. And we were told in such a way that it was very difficult to process without assuming that it was a bad situation. And my husband took it extremely hard and then started recognizing a lot of the assistance that the teachers were giving him were impacting his mental scape. And it was that was really allowing him to learn. If we are in a nervous system activated state, there's no chance our brain is going to absorb information. So my husband very quickly started to identify similar traits in himself, which is how a large amount of neurodivergent parents are coming to understand, advocate, and question everything in the system. And I didn't place myself even amongst this category until I got brain scans. And I got brain scans in 2022. And for me, this coincided with my UK research, where neurodiversity is now a social paradigm, that every brain has a different experience in life and adapts to those environmental, social, cultural experiences in different ways, to the point where all brains are different. And those who have diverted from what society considers the status quo are considered in America deficit, too much, needing medicated, and really kind of just place this very limited forgiveness upon. So I had to question everything once I got my brain scans. The largest amount of self-forgiveness came from my brain scans in concentration versus not. And what it showed is that blood flow in my prefrontal, when I am not concentrating, thinking, activated on something exciting, there are 2 literal giant holes in my prefrontal of blood flow traction. And this allowed me for the first time to have kind of a self-awareness moment that perhaps it's not my emotional incapacity or my social frustrations. It's my brain gets sad if I'm not actively stimulating the blood flow, the neurons, and enough to keep engaged. And that's what I had been diagnosed with ADHD my whole life, assuming it was an error, a default, but realizing if this is just a limited blood flow that is due to a lack of a certain environment that I find stimulating, I became so much nicer to myself when stuck in those environments.
Oh, I love that you became nicer to yourself. I think so many times when I'm talking to professionals and parents alike, they're worried about the diagnosis for good reason, because like we just said, it can have a very limiting connotation to it. The power in understanding our brains and how they work is literally life changing, because we don't feel broken. We just understand how to work with our brains instead of fighting against it so much. And I think you just illustrated that perfectly. Wow.
I've got goosebumps just you saying it, because it is, I was not a huge fan of myself, and my negative bias upon waking up was often more than I could really get myself out of, let alone then regulate my kids. And having the terminology, having the awareness of what my body and physiologically is happening to which I need to compensate is an extreme tool I need to be okay when sometimes my body is not fulfilling what my brain believes it should be doing at that time. And the terminology. So our conversation, well, you want to talk about this? Well, I don't know if I can. And then suddenly, oh, can I? When we discuss these different types. So after our talk, my brain was so excited about potential understandings that it looked up and discovered, though there's a lot of debate among experts about the exact classification system, which again, we could even begin American doctors, classification, what criteria, what insurance, the whole 9 yards of barriers. But there's phonological. So this is characterized with the actual processing and manipulation of the sounds of language. So for those who have oral frustrations, tongue-tied, Tourette's, tics, that would be not the inability to read, but the inability to process the information in a sounding way. Surface dyslexia is when there is trouble with the whole word recognition and spelling irregular words. Not surprising, American language is not the best, and we could talk about bilinguality and diagnosis for translating in a second language for those who are neurodivergent in multicultural situations. But irregular words are hard enough, let alone if your brain isn't used to the semiotic phrasing. So that's not surprising. The third is rapid autonomatized naming dyslexic, where that's the retrieval of letters, numbers, and objects. So when we're discussing maybe dyslexia isn't actually a writing language thing, maybe it takes so many different parts of the brain, we aren't accounting for the sensory processing differentials. Because rapid naming is a memory. It's the remembering the words, the fluency, the comprehension, the connection. And that's different than linguistics training. And then the visual. Before I would have said, yes, I think I have dyslexia because it took me a long time to read, but my numbers now aren't that flipped. And I had a tutor, so I don't know if I can talk about that. But number 4 is visual dyslexia. The moment I read that, that's where tracking text or perceiving letters or word forms accurately. And all of a sudden, my brain went, okay, well, if my brain defaults from being overstimulated from visual information, text is usually black and white, and I'm a color fanatic. So I didn't even think about the processing of simple forms and lines instead of fun text, decorative text, bold text. And so then I immediately started wondering, well, how do we consider dyslexia under this medical framework when there are these new inventions of dyslexic text that are proving just rephrasing, bubbling, highlighting words are eliminating this so-called deficit? It's just the brain processing differently again.
It's so interesting. And it for me, it explains. So I have a lot of, so my father's dyslexic. My sister, I believe, is dyslexic. And we all have different ways that it presents, which it all makes sense. And even if we went back to my grandfather, I think they've all been inventors. Like a lot of the things fit, right? All struggled in reading and spelling in different ways. But and again, in different ways, right? So like we all kind of have the same brain, and it's all, I would say you would group it as different than most, right? Like we definitely process information differently than most people do and see the world differently. But then within our little group, we're all very different too. And so this visual versus the verbal and speech, I mean, all of these pieces are coming together to make it makes sense when you say these different ways of how we process information, and then the linguistics that come in. So you've got intake and then exporting, right, back out into the world. Sometimes is more of a challenge for some of us than others. It's absolutely fascinating.
And you mentioned it very well that genetics play a key part. Science doesn't fully know. We are still living in a medical framework where they're looking for interventions or fixing or all that, let alone taking it from the neurodiversity standpoint of just recognizing that our brains are different, and perhaps we should just be going under how they're different to really associate it. We know that brain structure is different. We've seen that there are increased gray matter in certain areas and altered white matter connectivity in autistic brains versus ADHD. We know that there's ranges of co-occurrence from 25 to 50% with dyslexia. We are talking about dyslexia under this diagnosed medical framework. And that's where our conversation when we originally talked about it was, well, how can we know that we are being properly assisted in these tools that now seem outdated? Two neurodivergent parents here who are trying their best to understand kids' differences. I'm a strong supporter of the word differences as being more supportable than deficits, because it is differences. Even amongst ourselves, our brains are different. And those I find who have the privilege of being diagnosed and being given almost the gift of allowing a self-identity marker, which a lot of us really need for self-awareness and identifying tools for our neurotypes. Our research began because a family of four had every neurodiversity expectation. For those who are unfamiliar, neurodivergent is going to be a term that is very much umbrellaed and discussed under different categories, but for the most part, ADHD and autism are getting their heyday right now. But Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, immune disorders, neuroacquired was actually a consideration that I was originally looking into, since I also have a traumatic brain injury. And so neuroacquired and stroke and long COVID are now showing very similar neurological patternings to neurodivergence. So how are things going to change when there's so much now showing that personalized brain recognition is how we can help people in the future with all that society is placing on us?
Yeah, I think that is $1 million question, at least. A million seems low. But I think as it relates to the world at work, intrinsically, I do believe most leaders know that each person has a differently wired brain, but then we still automatically almost go back to, well, what we need to do this, or we need to follow this process, which we also know doesn't work for every brain. But yet we still go back to it, maybe because it's the way we've always done it, or it's just comfortable, or whatever it is. Can you talk a little bit about your career experience and how, as maybe a differently wired brain, you kind of fit or didn't fit into the corporate world?
Yes. And I can immediately feel my nervous system and the blood flow heating up already, and probably even going to my cheeks, because I actually recently left a position of 13 years. I was in a place working with another neurodivergent, and slowly came to realize that there were neurodivergents within the company that were getting support in such a way that it really angered me. um, I didn't know I was struggling until I started meeting other people like me who were thriving, and I didn't know that there was the chance that I could thrive. Um, I didn't know I had auditory processing disorder until I was talking to individuals that were in a certain pipeline, and it changed. Like, that blew my mind, because I hadn't recognized up until that point I'd been receiving all of my information orally. So I'd been put in this environment where I felt that I was constantly struggling, and I had 12 years of surplus reviews. But when I started asking about how to help what I was discovering my brain needed, it became a nuisance. And it became more difficult, and it became harder to focus on my job, realizing that I could be thriving. And I got into the worst rejection sensitivity, brain fog dysphoria, where I'd be so scared to have negative feedback, preemptively expecting that I'd be given information without an agenda and without a follow-up that I would then need to do that I might not have in my daily report, that I would walk into work activated. I'd be scared on the phone. If I was in a dysregulated state and I would eat, I would get indigestion. And I just started noticing how much cognitive energy I was spending not feeling supported, and how much damage that was doing to my self-esteem and self-worth, to the point where it started becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I assumed I was going to mess up on projects. And I assumed that maybe I couldn't make a decision because I was second guessing everything. And it was leaking into my home life. And my brain was starting to get sad. So I would just want to come home and sleep. And I started thinking I didn't have potential. And I really just worked myself into a spiral until I found neurodiversity people who were willing to amplify my voice. And I was able to start recognizing what support was available. In the workplace, the large majority of what, air quotes, I'm going to say accommodations, because in the UK, they just call them productivity enhancers. So again, the fact that we
Such a better word.
right?
That's so much better.
You're in an environment which you're being told you need to have to ask for them to modify because you aren't functioning in the space that they're providing for you. If you have self-advocacy issues, even recognizing what you need and then being able to ask, and then if it isn't received well, is just debilitating for a lot of cognitive and executive functioning skill sets. So it got so bad that I was crying like every day. And I put in my 2 months notice. And then at 2 weeks, they said, you can just go ahead and go, and you can stay on to your 2 months, but we don't want your input. And after 13 years, I was gone. And it was just, I had to go to therapy to kind of detach my identity from who I thought I was there and who I thought I was proud of being in that position. And it took so much more healing than I ever thought it would take just to change jobs. And that was from having to advocate for what I needed, and then having to say that under their prescription, I had to claim disability. And it was just, it was more than I was willing to do and still be able to keep up with my job. So I did 2 months of unemployment. And for all the neurodivergent job seekers out there, I was completely delusional. And having been in a cozy place for 13 years, I had no idea that down to resumes for having inclusion language, to neurodivergence being tracked through AI for appropriated skills, that if they don't fall in tech or cybersecurity, they're flagged. It's so hard leaving someplace that you thought you belonged, but wasn't good for your mental health, to then advocate and find, I do the work I do because I had to process my emotions and my difficulties and my bad nights. And my writing partner was like, well, you can't be the only one doing this. You can't be the only one feeling this. In the workplace, if you don't have an established group, you do feel alone. If you're not allowed in the established group, every part of it leaks. So from the manager who might not have training, to not knowing that agendas and written follow-ups are the number one requested. Next is flexibility, just to be comfortable knowing that medications may be hard to get, that oversensory might occur with different blood flow. It's really just overall caring, and having to fight to make someone care about what you need to function is its own level of like cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're describing these, one thing comes to mind, and leaders are always, I think, scared to start putting these improvements in place because they think it's going to cost a lot of money. Everything you just mentioned costs $0, no matter how you slice and dice it, right? Like it is just about being a caring, understanding leader. and team member and peer, truly HR leader, whatever it is. The other piece of it is knowing what you need. I come into contact and coach a lot of individuals who are like, I wouldn't even know what to begin to ask for. Is there a process that you went through that maybe you could kind of share with listeners of how you even know? I mean, certainly an agenda and meeting minutes are, you would think that those would be table stakes at this point for most companies or all companies, but I can tell you that it's not. So that's one thing for listeners. Please put out an agenda. That would be really helpful.
Agendas before meeting, not only so that people can know if they need to prep material, it lets people anxiety wise feel that they are aware of what the head person considers important. And it also maintains tracking of time and schedule for those who have time management issues. It also allows you to follow along and keep notes if you are distracted, or there's so many reasons agendas are great to have. And then the follow-ups. One of the things I noticed that I would strongly recommend to any other auditory processing individuals is if you have a manager who only gives you new information in a one-on-one or over a call, you follow up with a meeting and you follow up with an email saying, did I have this correct? That this is what you would like me to follow up with. Unfortunately for me, I took the long route of I did not know where to start. I was fortunate to be in a company that had proud neurodivergents coming in through a pipeline. And I connected with every single one that I could meet with so that I could better understand their brain as a researcher. What happened is the more I met with, the more I learned what they were aware of. That's how I learned what masking was. Masking is when we physically repress self-stimming behaviors, whether that's tapping, twisting, flapping, clacking knuckles, all the multiple ways that our bodies are propriocepting, which is our sixth sense, which is our need to figure out where we are in the environment. For neurodivergents who have a hard time connecting their mind and their body, these physical abilities of movement are what help them stay regulated. So I didn't even realize that individuals who were given time to go walk, who were encouraged to exercise, who had regular breaks on their calendars to help with that, were less likely to have physical pain in meetings where they were forced to sit still. And so masking was a word I just learned discussing with an autistic female in a tech department that opened my long history of chronic pain into something I could manage. And that led me to writing down times when my stress levels were higher so I could recognize what environments were doing it, what conversations were doing it, what accessibility was causing my brain to not feel comfortable. Color contrast. That's one of the things I'm constantly surprised that we still fight with. For those who have color blindness, there is the difficulty to stay focused, and yet we still love to print on colored paper with fonts that some people can't read. Accessible signage, right there, clear, concise, easy to read, agendas, maps, activity sets. The more information our brain has, the less likely it's going to default to worst case scenarios.
Oh my gosh, so much good information there. And I love how you're kind of talking about how to even set up an office as a different thinker. And I know you've done some research in this way too. If you could design your very perfect office, what would that look like for a differently wired brain?
I had this question asked 2 weeks ago by students at St. Louis in Canada. And my first response, not surprisingly, being a neurotype that is commonly aligned with those who are autistic and ADHD, was autistic part wanted a castle. I want a fortress. I want to feel safe. I want to know I'm protected. And then the impulsivity, the other side swing set was like, yes, but I also want there to be a forest in the middle, and I want there to be lights, and I want there to be twinkle situations. So This perfectly illustrates it all depends on what brain patterning that day has beset my body and my rhythms. We are doing tons of work on this. My writing partner and I have been actively investigating how to help people understand their own triggers, their own nervous system activation, when that is not a tool set we give our kids, our students, even in therapy. You aren't necessarily trained to recognize the thoughts that you are physiologically reacting to that are often causing the negative stress triggers. So, cognitive behavioral therapy is one that I always recommend to anyone who is trying to figure out why their body seems to be against them because of those brain patternings. And it is through that research that we've recognized every brain is different, and you have to have an adjustable space for both sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. Sensory seeking are going to need lights, sounds, not necessarily together and not necessarily fluctuating, but just the opportunity to go to spaces that have interesting visual activities, that have open space for communal integration for those who are very much extroverted. But the introverted, quiet, distraction-free, minimal sounds, low lights. Lights are one that's very difficult for me. Today, I'm at home in my own space, so my nervous system's already doing better. Most times, the individuals who meet me will see me with pink glasses because they reduce the different type of light spectrums in an environment. So my brain isn't working as hard to adjust to the shadows, which is how we perceive color. Our brains do so freaking much for us. And those who are neurodivergent are seeing it. We are processing. We are walking into a space and recognizing the lights, the sound, the haptics, the optic effects, the space for our body to adjust. And if it's too much, our brains will react by flight or fright. There are also fawn is where you socially react in the appropriate way, which socialized as women find themselves very good at masking and really folding themselves into the positions and identities the space requires, instead of recognizing they can be themselves and ask for their needs in a space that is actually welcoming for them.
I think all women probably do that to some extent. And then if you have a differently wired brain, it's amplified significantly. I shouldn't say all, that's always a dangerous word, but
Yes.
a good majority, especially when you're in a business situation and you're at an executive table, as I've been for years, and I'm younger than most, I'm a woman, I, have that imposter syndrome, which I don't even like using that word because I just think it's growing into a new position is how I like to reframe that. Um, but it's tough, right? And so you do tend to act like the other males at the table, or you just and part of it's just I think natural, but there's definitely a piece of it that's exhausting. And coming and walking out of those meetings, I felt significantly more tired sometimes when I was trying to overcompensate. As I'm picturing HR leaders or just business leaders, CEOs, executives in general, thinking, okay, Piper, okay, Nancy, these are all great things, but what can I actually do in my business to implement? One idea that's coming to mind, and I'd love for you to share too, is to have different areas where people can go. So flexibility as far as quiet areas where you're expected to kind of, brainstorming and talking amongst others is more kind of encouraged, I guess. And so they kind of have common workspaces and having different patterns and layouts within the building that are kind of identified ahead of time is one idea that I have. I don't know if you know of others or if you've seen that actually in play at
Oh,
corporations.
happy to talk about that because, not surprisingly, as our research went from cultural heritage sites, which were really designated as being community, environment, and family friendly, we noticed that there were some places, especially overseas, that were integrating similar environments. And for that kind of fluctuation of sensory seeking and sensory avoiding, it is that adjustability. It is knowing that every brain is going to be different. One size does not fit all. One ADHD person is going to be different. So there's a bunch of different things that I think HR should be cognizant of. The hardest one that I noticed was when I was explaining to HR how to support me, I had to train HR on why I needed the support. So I had to understand myself enough to explain first what I needed. I had to then research what other companies were doing to explain that this was common in the early stages of just trying to establish a safe framework to ask for help. So HR training, the very infuriating fireball I can feel inside my stomach is that the company I worked at had a learning platform known as Develop You with pre-populated videos, most of them UK, because that seems to be the most positive frameworks for neurodiversity inclusion. But they were not mandatory. They were not advertised. They were expected for managers who had a self-identified, usually those who were under the disability framework. But that is something that company-wide could have brought huge impacts of positivity, not just the segmented people who are working in that group. What I find is the more people I meet and I discuss my son, myself, all the different people I've met, there's someone in their life that immediately they are now able to better understand from knowing about these variations. So HR should, from the very onset, just be sharing awareness, positive framed awareness. Secondly, it should know now that neurodiversity is becoming a commonality term, what common things are. So assistive technology like speak to text. My brain goes faster than my mouth can. If I don't have that, I get frustrated that I cannot compete with my ability to type as fast as I'm trying to and have spelling errors, but I'm so excited to meet someone, I send it anyway. So things like Grammarly, having a service. Those companies who aren't afraid of AI are the ones who are going to do the best for their neurodivergent employees. AI is going to allow them to check what they're saying has the right social framework. It is going to allow for meeting review notes so they know how to then properly figure out their next steps. It's going to allow them to budget time. When Microsoft Cognitive Toolkit came out, companies couldn't ignore, or companies chose to not ignore if they chose to, but the very understanding that some brains are overdone by too many decisions, by too many font changes, that simplicity and support are the best frameworks you can give a brain for productivity. So flexibility in the space, allow those hideaway spaces, allow a closed door for someone to make a phone call, allow the open spaces, but recognize that the only way you'll know what is needed is to listen to the employees and be aware of what could be an available resource to them.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, yes, and yes. So I think you already said this, but I want to make sure that we underscore this. Listening to our own bodies in different situations is most likely one of the best indicators of what is kind of going on with you. And so just taking note of that, I think it's really, really helpful as you're starting to develop these, like, okay, I know some days I'm more tired than others, and it doesn't necessarily line up with my calendar, or I didn't necessarily have more meetings or a more stressful situation. So what else could it be? And, a lot of times a nutritionist will tell us to keep a diary of what we eat. I think we could do the very same thing with how did our day go? Which meetings took more energy? And starting to bring those commonalities together of, well, I did have an agenda in that meeting, or somebody did take notes for me in that meeting. And so, gosh, those are things that seem to be that common through line of those tend to really help me. And I think the other thing that I always encourage people to do is look back and see when there was a leader or a manager that really helped you through a situation, and what worked for you in the past? Because usually we can duplicate that. I truly believe that most leaders and managers want to help people. I'm sure that there are a few that are just jerks, and I'm sorry for that. But for most people, I think that they want to help people, right? I think most of us truly want to help. So look back and see what other things have worked in the past and see if we can duplicate that. And at least it's a starting point with a conversation with either an HR leader or your leader, him or herself, to get started and to try things, right? Like it's always better to try than to silently struggle by ourselves or even in groups. Better in a group, I think, but still not great.
Neurodivergence, we need our group, even though we find socialization frustrating and exhausting. My biggest difficulty was that I am one who doesn't have a lot of social frameworks outside of my family and work. So between my husband, my kids, and my boss, those were the only feedbacks I was getting. And if you have neurodivergent kids, you're not getting positive feedbacks. And if you're with a partner who is also neurodivergent and is your only support amongst your neurodivergent family, they are not a vending machine for your self-worth either. So for a boss, there are some who find having a brain to manage that is different than what they know just frightening or difficult or extra work. I don't think it's necessarily that the boss means to be neglectful or harmful, but in my case and many neurodivergent brains, I found, especially for those who are coming late life diagnosed, also co-occurring autism, we internalize what a lot of, especially other gendered males, externalize in their anger and frustration and sensory overload. We place it upon ourselves and we really take it in our bodies. Until I learned, and it was only late in life, how to recognize what's happening in my body. I felt like a prisoner. I felt like I was basically at the mercy of my brain and I wasn't sure how to be on top of it. So when you say that, what's the next step? I'll go one further. And our research required the need of adaptive tools or like an Apple Watch. For myself, I'm often so busy trying to keep aware of the situation, I won't notice when my body's reacting to something. So we did a case study again with a different Canadian university where they had a VR workspace that the person could go into before returning to the office. It allowed them to personalize, to get acclimated. It allowed them independence in prioritizing how they wanted to come into work. And we took that and continued with an article recommending biosensory feedback. Because as I started having these really painful, exhaustive days that I couldn't mentally process why yet because of the emotional, social conversations, I started relying on biometrics to let me know. So for those who do have the difficulty of detachment and women who internalize their anxiety, this can often lead to detachment from the body. So not eating, not sleeping, not noticing when you are upset and then eating and having digestion or IBS issues. Just knowing how to be safe in my body is something I wake up as a goal, and I probably will forever. It is a long process. Meditation, body flow, small amounts of caffeine, continuous exercise, 10 to 15-minute, I hate to say forced conversation with peers, even if I don't want to get my brain out of its negative spiral I might not notice I'm in. It is a stair-stepped life agenda that requires the neurodivergent female to be who she wants to be without second guessing it, and can take that enough to meet others and be like, oh my God, you get me so much. That's why I don't need to stay home and be sad. That's right. I can find others like me who are questioning if our brains actually are worth criticizing or what if being kinder to our brains will solve all these amazing problems just by us talking about this?
Wow. There's so much to celebrate with each of these, each person's brain, right? And I agree. So many times we get in our own ways. You listed so many amazing things, and I'm a huge fan of meditation, nutrition, sleep, water, like we talked about at the very beginning. Um, and I encourage people, just try one, right? Like it's a lot to do at once, and I don't think anybody does them all at the start, but do the one that seems the most fun or exciting or the most manageable to you to start. And I was listening actually to a podcast this morning about staring off into the horizon. And we so often look at what's in front of us on our phones or computers, and we're in this kind of shallow depth of field for so many hours of our day that actually getting outside and staring off into the horizon is really powerful for our eyes. And so it made sense. And I was thinking about our conversation today, like, oh, this is a universe thing for sure.
Neurologically, biophilia, adding plants, adding nature, we are hardwired to want to be in the environments that are good for us. And being in low light, cubicles that are from the 80s and have questionable duct systems. There is so much in our environment that is working against us that it's easy to not take care of ourselves. 2 years ago, I got my brain scans. A year in, I started realizing it wasn't going to be a benefit to where I was in the workplace. And 6 months after that, I hit my lowest low. I'm now at a job that I love and it completely fulfills my identity. And I have the extra energy to meet people and do this where I wouldn't have been able to if I was constantly disliking my own brain.
And I think of the ripple effect that you're making on the world and sharing your stories and being vulnerable enough. Thank you for sharing that it hasn't always been pretty, because I can imagine that there's some listeners right now that are in that low point, right? And they're struggling and they're hoping that there's a better, brighter side coming. As we wrap up, any thoughts or words of encouragement or anything for a listener that might be in that spot?
I always laughed because a lot of times people call me perky or peppy. And I wake up with a dysregulated nervous system, and it would be so much easier to say I hate everything and everyone and crawl back into bed. It is an active fight to fight the negative bias in my brain. It is not easier that society doesn't support wanting to be bright and loud and happy. So even trying to go against the stream of positivity is difficult, let alone when your brain is only feeding you worst case scenario. If you are a neurodivergent, especially a female who finds herself in this situation where you are completely questioning your identity, you don't know how to train your brain, there are us out there who have gotten past it. Probably will cycle back through it. Hormones are a real thing. I have changed my sensory profiles based off of my hormonal position and children's status. So even identifying who you were may change the next day if your body is changing, which we don't talk about. We don't talk about how you may not be hormonally, sensory, brain, cognitively, spiritually the same person the next day and still be kind to yourself. So baby steps is what it takes. I started with just enough water for my brain to keep moist, which sounds so terrible to say, but you got to remember it's just a squishy sponge. If you're not drinking, it's hydrated too, and your body needs it. Movement. If I can't move my blood flow, that's when I start being negative. So talk with your friends, go for a walk, monitor your caffeine. Carbs are not very good for ADHD individuals. If you didn't know that, it's not a good truth, but our bodies process slower. So find your tribe. That's what my publications are, our books on free access knowledge. Find either one of us if you are really in a low place, because we are here to say we've been there. At least we can give you one word of advice or no, you're not alone. Try and stay positive and work with your brain if you can.
Absolutely, absolutely. Piper, where can everyone find you?
LinkedIn is my main social media, and not surprisingly, our brains love to either imposter syndrome and make us question our own identity, or make us wondering if we're not doing enough because of societal expectations to show the good stuff. So LinkedIn is usually great. I will recommend anyone who is not neurodivergent but is wanting to get in this space. The best way to approach a neurodivergent is with enthusiasm and something interesting. So instead of just saying, hi, I like your work, or hi, may I work with you, be like, I love pillows today. The more vulnerable, the more you can share your different brain, the more likely a connection for a neurodivergent will be to engage with you, even if you don't understand their brain. Access point.
I know, and now my brain's gone off onto pillows, right? Like, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I should go shopping for more pillows this afternoon."
A wonderful reminder to any neurodivergent who's been told they can't socialize. It's just the topic doesn't suit your brain. So don't be ashamed if you happen to love a topic. It is an entry point for those who do. So put in your bio. I'm a neurodivergent. Feel free to message me about pillows. Like that, it's the little access points that create connection that will help keep you positive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Piper. I have written down so many more topics that we can hopefully circle back on and have you future episodes. I really think that the women's health piece of it is so important, and I know some people are talking about it, but it's not getting out there as much. And so we'll definitely circle back on that. So I hope all of our listeners had as much fun as I did this morning talking to you. I absolutely loved our conversation.
We truly want to know how this helped you, what else you need, and what else we could be sharing about our long struggle to find what worked for us in case it can help you.
Absolutely. Piper is a research I wanna say enthusiast because I just feel like there's so much energy around it, and
It's my love language. Too many times we are kept from information that could help us love ourselves for no reason. And if I can help someone by my love of research figure out why they don't like some part, then it will make my day.
with that, we will leave it until next time, friends. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. It is literally the best way you can support our work here. And if you're feeling extra generous, take a screenshot and tag us on social with one of your takeaways from the episode. Until next time, friends, embrace that unique brain you've been given.